So, you remember how I made a video about Preptober and how I was going to be participating? Yeah, I didn't finish. I barely even got started. There was a lot I didn't manage to get figured out and kept going around in circles and running into walls. I still plan on writing the idea eventually, but it certainly wasn't ready for any writing challenges. To be fair, I did do all my prep and planning within like the last week of October, so I really wasn't properly prepared this year. I decided far too last minute that I was going to try and participate again, and lesson learned, plan further ahead. For now, that idea is shelved until I can figure out the places where I got stuck and have the story take the shape it's meant to. But I did start another project recently, something that's always been another goal of mine. I made a webcomic! For some backstory, I stumbled upon a series of animated shorts called Beirenzai, based on a webcomic that revolves around Chinese mythological creatures and figures going through daily life in modern society. I found the idea and the characters really charming, entertaining enough that I watched all the episodes I could find, and then found the webcomic to read and see what didn't make the animated episodes. But that got the gears turning. See, I've always wanted to make a webcomic. I love creating stories and characters, and I love drawing. However, I never felt like my art skills were up to the task. After all, every webcomic I saw had such polished art, and I never felt like my art was to that level. But making this channel got me thinking. I've noticed that since starting this channel, my art is steadily improving. My line art is getting smoother, and I'm getting closer to the level I want to be at. The mentality behind this channel was always letting go of the idea that my art had to be perfect. I'd seen the advice several times that you just need to make the thing exist first. You can make it better after that. I'd like to think that I've accomplished that goal with this channel. I may still have some messy parts of line art or things to improve when it comes to drawing backgrounds, but having the mentality that I just needed to get it done so the video could go out on time, turning it loose before I can get lost in the details, it really helped with taking that pressure off. It's far too easy to fall into the trap of continually adding and refining details and never finishing the piece, and this keeps me from doing that. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, it's made me more confident in my art. It's still far from perfect, but I think I've made some great improvements from where I was initially. I'm already several steps ahead of where I was, frustrated with my line art and my poses, constantly comparing my skill level to others my age who have been drawing and creating art just as long as I have. Or stumbling across a younger artist who felt leagues ahead of where I was. But comparing yourself to others is a poison. It's fine to admire and study the techniques of others, but don't let yourself get discouraged. If it takes you a while to reach the level you want to be at, then so be it. So, with all of that, I made a webcomic. By the time this video comes out, I won't have a whole lot of episodes out. I'm starting relatively small, something light that I won't have to stress too much about plot and action just yet. I'm just starting out, and I'm still learning a lot, so I didn't want to overload myself. Circling back to Fei Denzai's simple setup, I was inspired to do something similar. My webcomic, Through the Hedges, falls under a gag/slice of life kind of story. I'd call it a 4-panel style comic, but I don't know that every episode will stick to only 4 panels. Sometimes it might take me a little longer to set up the joke. But one of my biggest interests has always been the Fey folklore of Scotland, Ireland, and England. So similar to how Fei Denzai takes figures like Owlie or the Jade Rabbits and puts them into modern day, I thought, what if I do that with the Fey? And things took off from there. I started designing characters, coming up with the main character and the beings she'd encounter, or even the shenanigans that she might get involved in. It was so much fun coming up with these characters in my first couple episodes. And now, of course, I'm not expecting this thing to do numbers. I'm still a small creator, and I'm especially unknown on the platforms I'm publishing the webcomic on. I'm just doing this because it's something I've always wanted to make, and because I'm having fun. But if other people also enjoy it, then that means the world to me. The shape my idea eventually took is that the main character, Wren Abernathy, has recently inherited her grandmother's cottage in a countryside town. However, she's got some unusual neighbors. The kind that dance around in circles all night long and leave mushroom rings behind. But those aren't the only good neighbors living in town. In today's age, these neighbors do their best to blend in and fade into the background, letting humanity take center stage. Throughout the process, Wren also became a witch, someone who's used to the shenanigans of the fair folk. It honestly kind of surprised me how much I really enjoyed these characters when I started creating them. Wren was the first to take shape. There's a lot of things I incorporated into her design that are things that I like. Big baggy sweaters, long skirts, a lot of earthy colors in her color scheme. I guess the best way to sum it up is my idea of coziness distilled into a person. She's very patient and an optimist. She's very easy to get along with and always starts her mornings with a cup of tea. Her favorite hobby is gardening. For her name, I've actually wanted to use the surname Abernathy for a while, so I've had it written down in a notebook for ages by now. And when I started coming up with Wren's concept, it seemed like a fitting last name. For her first name, I wanted it to be tied to nature. Where I live, we have these little house wrens that sometimes nap in the frame of the awnings. It's very cute. And that was what made me think of her name. Next came Oberon. His design came first, inspired by a fan art I saw of Vincent from Final Fantasy VII, where his hair was braided with flowers in it, and it just activated something specific in my brain, and I ran with it. I also recently rewatched the Legend of Hay movie with some friends, and that definitely influenced his personality. It's always been funny to me when a character doesn't emote very much and does some really silly or ridiculous things with such a blank expression, like Wu Xian often does in the series. So that carried over into Oberon. He's very calm and composed, earnest in his efforts to connect with humans. He may be a High Lord, in charge of the Fae creatures in the area, but he thinks very little of that status, and is much happier to mingle among his subjects than lord over them from a distance. His name, however, was a bit harder to come up with. I had no idea what I wanted his name to be. In fact, when I came up with the idea for the first 2 episodes of the webcomic, he didn't have a name at all. Trying to come up with something that sounded suitably Fae but not outright Lord of the Rings was hard. But Oberon kept popping in my head. Then I had the idea that once he had an encounter with a certain legendary bard who used his name in one of his plays. And then I loved the idea of a running gag where he has a beef with Shakespeare over it. And that just completely sold me. Like I said, there's no overarching plot here. It's just silly little things I think of, like how a fae might react to modern things, avoidance to iron and such, or how the characters interact with each other. Now, maybe obvious from what I'm working on here, but there may also be romance later on, question mark? Given that it's primarily just a silly little comedic series, it probably won't be anything too in-depth. But I've just really come to enjoy the way they interact together. But we'll see how things turn out. Now, I can't say how long I'll keep up with it, but since I'm just doing this for fun, I'm not putting any pressure on myself for how long it should be or anything like that. I still haven't even fully decided on an update schedule. For now, I'm aiming for every other Tuesday. I'm still making videos after all, so I don't want to overload myself and wind up stressed out. The update schedule may get shuffled though later on down the line as I figure things out and see what works best for me. Like, every other Tuesday might turn out to be not enough time and I might have to move it later in the week. I'm a notorious procrastinator, so that's honestly very possible. There's plenty of videos on this channel where I've done everything the day before it was supposed to go live. I'm not proud of it, but undiagnosed ADHD go brrr, as it were. But my upload schedule here is every other Sunday, and then I usually take the next week off before I start working on the next video. So, my way of thinking right now is using that week to work on the comic. I feel like that'll work the best for me in the long run and give me time to work on each thing. Well, fingers crossed at least. Now, I'm far from an expert on the subject, but I figured I might as well share some things I've learned in the process. It's important to do research before you get started. Now, I'm not saying you can't jump in blindly, but you're going to run into a wall at some point. This is purely my process of how I got started. It might work for you and it might not, and that's perfectly okay. But I hope it can still point you in the right direction. First, if you've never made a comic before, I suggest starting small. It doesn't have to be anything grand yet. Start with something light that you don't need to put too much pressure on yourself for. At least see if you even enjoy the process of making a comic first. This doesn't have to be anything you plan on posting anywhere. Just test the waters first. The biggest thing is to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure on yourself right off the bat. The worst thing you can do is give yourself too strict of a schedule or start too ambitious and get overwhelmed and end up not enjoying the process at all. A lot of work goes into a comic, even if you're just making something simple, so make sure you give yourself enough time to work on it. I mean, it took me all day just to do 4 panels. Absolutely learn everything you can. There's a ton of webcomic creators who also have videos on YouTube talking about the process. They've got good advice on paneling, world building, character creation, and story crafting. Well, there's tons of resources for the latter 3 on YouTube in general. Everything is going to be helpful to you at some point. Even if you start out with something simple like a 4-panel gag comic, you might want to develop something more plot-driven later on. Now, I'll admit paneling probably doesn't matter much if you're doing a gag comic, but it's still very useful if you want to make a full comic later down the line. Before I even got started, I watched so many videos about the process of creating comics and characters. Also related, make sure you research all the webcomic platforms and find what's best for you. This was probably what I've done the most research on. It's also best to have your webcomic on multiple platforms. The more eyes on it, the better. Not to sound like a wet blanket though, but again, make sure you're doing this because you enjoy it, not for the views. You're going to have a bad time if you're only in it for the views. That's the fastest route to burnout when things don't go like you hoped. Another thing I've done, and this may only work for my simple format, but I've made a working file on my computer that's just the blank panels on a page. That way I don't have to constantly remake it and it keeps it consistent. But again, I'm doing a simple little gag comic. That might not work for everyone. If you do this, however, I want to make it very clear that when you start a new comic page, make sure you hit Save As so you don't save over your blank format. Speaking from experience. Not that it's hard to fix if you do, but it is annoying. Be careful, guys. But by far, what I feel is the most important thing, make the webcomic you want to read. It is so important that you enjoy your characters, your genre, and your story. Make something you'll enjoy. If you're not a fan of the comic you've created, you're going to hate working on it. You're going to dread working on it. You're going to hit burnout so much faster. Honestly, this is just my writing advice in general, though. Write the story you want to read. Make the comic you want to read. It is so important that you enjoy what you're making. Don't pick a genre or design your characters based on what's popular right now unless that's something you yourself enjoy. If you like romance webtoons and enjoy reading them, that's one thing. But if it's not something you typically read, don't make one just because it's popular. If it's not something you enjoy, that lack of passion is going to show through. This also ties into just being in it for the views. Be passionate, love your characters, love your story. If you love it, that passion will show through, and your readers will also fall in love with the thing you made. As always, we finish this off with a look at the final image. Since this video is about my webcomic, I wanted to draw the 2 I'd consider the main characters. I already talked about them a little briefly, but this is Ren and Oberon. I used a reference for the pose and I planned it out in my sketchbook. It was a little challenging for me since perspective is still something I struggle with, and I think the original sketchbook sketch probably turned out a bit better, but that's usually how it goes anyway. I did go back in afterwards and add some leafy, willow kind of drapery just because I thought it looked nice. I did forget to go in and add some bounce lighting, but well. On the whole, I'm still pretty pleased with it. I think it turned out really nice. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and I hope it was helpful. If you'd like to check out Through the Hedges, you can read it on Webtoon Canvas, Tapas, and Namikomi, whichever platform you prefer. Like I said, I don't know how long I'll keep up with it, but so far I'm having fun, and that's what's most important. You can find the links to each one down below. If you'd like to support the channel, I also have an Etsy shop link down below. I recently added a mug design to the shop based on my love of the whimsical illustrations of Beatrix Potter. Or, you know, every children's book where the characters are little woodland creatures wearing little outfits. If that sounds like it's right up your alley too, feel free to go check it out. I do plan on adding some more handmade things to the shop in the future, so keep an eye out. As always, thank you so much for watching. It means the world to me that people out there watch my silly little videos. This year has been rough, but I just wanted to say I appreciate each and every one of you who have subscribed so far or watched my videos. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday season. By the time this video goes up, we'll already be starting 2026, but I hope it's a far kinder year for all of us. Until next time, see ya!